What's going on, everybody? Today we're talking about The Substance, and the director Coralie, who I'm a huge fan of, she directed Revenge, which is such an amazing and fun film. And similarly to Revenge, she decides to take her feminine themed approach, except wow, she cranked it up to like 100 in terms of intensity. The simple plot is Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, is this like fading celebrity, and she decides to take this like green goop serum that's like straight out of Reanimator, and essentially it splits her up into two separate people, the second being the idealized younger version of herself played by Margaret Qualley, and they have to swap every 7 days because it's still the same person, and as you can imagine, things go way wrong. But that is an extremely distilled synopsis of the movie, to say the least. This movie is heavy, bleak, and uncompromising, but at the same time it's like this like Lifetime movie about this teen going through stardom, and then it somehow turns into like a Cronenberg movie. You know, it's funny because in some weird way, this movie reminds me of Audition, which is just another absolutely insane film where for the majority of the movie, you kind of forget you're in a horror movie. And then when it does become a horror movie, you're taken aback so much more because you weren't expecting the shift to be so intense. The color palette for this movie, by the way, is absolutely beautiful. There's so many bold colors in so many different memorable environments, the use of bright red, blues, and I was so obsessed with her yellow jacket throughout the entire thing. And the use of sound and camera movement, it just blows you away during so many different sequences. Like when you're in the new body and it's like you're adjusting at the same time because it's like shot in a POV style fashion, but when combined with the sound, it's so disorienting and it really makes you feel like you're the one that's adjusting to the new body as well as the character, kind of like you're reconfiguring at the same time. It's brilliantly done. This movie kind of relies on the knowledge that the viewer understands the idea of being afraid of the loss of popularity or fear of age. And one of my takeaways was that it was good social commentary on so much commercialization of products that are meant to make you look younger or prevent you from looking an older age. So the viewers are conditioned to easily be able to sympathize with Elizabeth Sparkle's motive. Even the fact that the kits and instructions are so clear, yet not one person in the movie questions, oh, what are the side effects or what are the drawbacks of this? It's like it's designed for people that are desperate enough to not care about those consequences. And so often in the movie is the characters reminded, are you sure you want to continue with this? Like, it's not like these people were forced into it. And I found it very interesting that for the majority of the movie, they kind of disregard the other's body when it's in its catatonic fixture, again, really emphasizing that lack of importance of one another. And while yes, there's a lot about this movie that's critiquing the male gaze and the objectification of women and their value when they have a certain look, but I love so much more that this movie is about self-love and being more comfortable in your skin. And because of that, this movie has so much heart. I love how this movie starts with Elizabeth being content with where she's at, and her apartment is essentially a shrine of herself with her accolades. And as the movie goes on and her self-worth deteriorates, that like armor, you could say, it begins peeling, and it's just really good use of space. And as Sue becomes more powerful and prominent, Elizabeth's worth is so low that she can't even muster the courage to leave for a date with a guy that's basically a stranger and a fanatic of hers. There's a lot of struggle between Sue and Elizabeth, and by the way, Margaret Qualley does an amazing job. Obviously, Demi Moore speaks for herself as she is a seasoned actress, and it was no surprise that she delivered a Toni Collette level performance here. But Margaret Qualley, I've seen her in that abysmal Death Note movie from Netflix, and she's gotten better over time. Like, she was in The Nice Guys, which I absolutely adore that movie, and she was just an all-star here. But the struggles between Sue and Elizabeth were so good. The juxtaposition between both sides of stardom was handled so well. And you know, Sue was far more selfish and insensitive to the rules, and I would have loved to see Elizabeth clap back a bit more against Sue. But thinking about it, the writing was so strong in this movie because you fully believe that of course the more mature, older version would be more cautious of the rules, but also be more willing to forgive the younger version for being naive despite the state she was in because of Sue. And the younger version would tend to be more selfish and greedy. Regardless of how much damage she was doing to Elizabeth, it didn't matter to her because it was all to the benefit of Sue. One of my favorite things about this movie is the wordless storytelling by the bookends of the film. How the star was created and with time it withered and was forgotten about, and by the end that poetic, cruel, and fantastical dream that she has where People idolized her regardless of how she looked was just so beautiful. Dennis Quaid, who is the stand-in for male toxicity, as he's essentially Elizabeth's and Sue's boss, who only cares for what will make him and the network more money. He was great for what he was tasked to do. He's definitely not Holly and Annie's dad here, that's for sure. He's cynical and imposing in a fun way. Honestly, I was so enraptured between the tension of Elizabeth and Sue that regardless of how cruel and cynical he was, I was just so much more entertained by the rest of the stuff going on. One thing though that I found very interesting was that despite his exploitation of the female body, and I don't know if it was a writing choice or not, but he never physically touches the female characters. Like honestly, at some point I was expecting it to go that far, but I found it very interesting that that was a choice that they didn't do that. Also, the editing was on point in this movie. You could definitely tell they had a lot of fun with it. I personally really love the cooking sequence while Sue is on the talk show and Elizabeth is cooking the most grotesque food of all time. And when it comes to horror, they do not hold back. There is so much body horror, and food has never looked scarier because unlike the menu, for example, food here is used to make you absolutely lose your appetite while watching it. I also loved the subtlety of body features being glorified in this film, yet at the same time, so much of the horror is those same things that we consider beautiful. Hair, nails, hands, teeth, and all these things that are directly associated with beauty are flipped and turned into some of the most disturbing imagery of the film. The slow transformation of Elizabeth as she's slowly turning into this monster. And I was getting tired of movies like Wreck, It Chapter 2, Barbarian, using these like old ladies as the thing to be scared of, but I like that it works in the context of this film because it's physical proof of the damage that Sue is causing Elizabeth. The bathroom mirror scene that rivaled something like Talk to Me, or the stitching and back injections that just looked so gnarly. In general, the effects and prosthetic work looked amazing. The suit and makeup had so much screen time and mobility, you got to really enjoy it. Towards the end of the movie, it kind of leads into a New Year's Eve broadcast that Sue had earned the privilege of hosting, but because of her battle with Elizabeth and not following the orders, she decides to recreate herself because she too is experiencing consequences, and it culminates into her becoming this like gnarly looking monster that everybody ridicules and calls a freak, despite the fact that she is constantly reminding everybody that she is both Sue and Elizabeth, who is supposed to be people that are regarded as beloved, but because she doesn't look like them anymore, people don't care. It was so soul crushing because we've seen the endeavor both these characters took to really be that image that everybody loved and now rejects. Hell, this movie even takes a jab at addiction because the fact that Sue knows the consequences of everything she went through and chose to duplicate again is just bonkers. But honestly, it was more heartbreaking when Sue was trying to get back home before the second injection and she was literally falling apart, but because she slightly still resembled herself, nobody cared to ask why she's hurting or if she needs help. It really emphasized the commentary of everybody pays attention to you when you're at your highest, but the moment you're not, everybody disregards you, and it's just really tragic stuff. And this movie has so many memorable lines, like when Harvey tells the shareholders she's his most beautiful creation. He shaped her for success. And even the saddest, most gut-wrenching line by Elizabeth that is essentially the thesis of the movie, when she's describing Sue and she says, "The only lovable part of me, you have to come back." It's just so devastating and amazing acting. Another amazing sequence is after she's attacked by everybody, she just turns into like a fire hose and gushes blood everywhere, and you even get like a POV shot of the blood going everywhere. That scene actually rivaled the Evil Dead remake scene. Yeah, I know, it's that much. This is 100% a movie that earns its stripes. Like, this is a movie that's 2 hours and 20 minutes, and you do not feel it. You are absolutely glued to the story that every time a new chapter comes on, you're that much more excited because the story hasn't ended yet. There is just so many scenes that leave your jaw on the ground, and this is definitely gonna be one of those movies that you won't be able to say years down the line, do you remember that scene? Like so many iconic movies, because that moment, there's gonna be too many different answers that different people will have different variations for. Honestly, my only complaint with the movie is that while the movie may not be the most subtle movie ever, for the first 85% of the movie, there's a lot of stuff that it's juggling that it's not necessarily shoving down your throat, but for the last like 10 minutes, it's like it tells you If you didn't get it by now, we're gonna make sure you got it. And personally for me, I just love when a movie challenges me to try and understand what it's trying to say without it having to over explain itself to me. And lastly, the initial car accident, while I do think it was amazing and it's shot in a way where you're like in the passenger seat, I do think it's a little ridiculous that there's like no damage to her. Like that car flipped like 4 times. But those are just minor things. This movie is bizarre and beautiful, brilliant and bleak, almost nihilistic in a way. And while Revenge didn't do well in the box office by any means, sadly, I really do hope that The Substance does amazing so more opportunities can come to Coralie. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.